Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. We are here again with our next talk of the day, which is about rising threat landscape, and it's going to be a little covering around the zero trust as well. So let's welcome Somen Das on the stage and we can get started with the session. Hi Somen.
Hey, hi, Vandana. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Big forum, big stage, and looking forward to share my experience with the larger audience.
Thank you so much, Somain. So, anyone of you who do not know Somain, Somain has been associated with OVAS for a quite long time from Bhubaneswar, and he's been contributing to many other open source things. So, let's get started and get to know him more and about the session. The stage is all yours, Somain.
Yeah, thanks, Vandana. So, again, as Vandana said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, based on your time zone that you're joining in. The topic that we chose today is basically just to capture the urgency and the severity of the situation with respect to 0 days, and we aim to highlight the sense of the impending danger that 0 day threats are having, so that the listeners, which is the audience, that you take the appropriate action. And there are so many avenues that is available within OASP how we can thwart all these 0 days attacks if we take the respective path in that direction. So with this, we'll get going. So first, the next 30 minutes, how it is going to look like for you, we'll do a deep dive into the title, which I mentioned that the 0 day has not been looked at with the same lens as the other vulnerabilities or threats or attacks. So why 0 day is the ultimate game now. So we'll do a little bit of deep dive, and why all of a sudden it has become so important. I'll present some facts and figures in front of you, and you guys can then take the or you take your own feedback and suggestions, and please share your thoughts after the session. And then we'll go forward in terms of how it the 0 days are actually related to application security, while we might be plugging something at the network layer or at a virtual patch level, but ultimately it is the application game. And how OASP is able to help mitigate these 0 day threats, that's where we will focus on, and we'll give you a path how you can go about that. So going ahead, we'll dissect this title first, breaking down the 0 day space. Now, just to give you a background in terms of those who are very new into the session, not having too much of insight into 0 days, it's to make it very simple. Who knows about the vulnerability or the attack that is happening? If it is the knowledge is constrained within the boundaries of a researcher or a threat actor or a particular government agency, then that's 0 day because it's not available publicly. um, the moment the day it becomes public, that is no more a 0 day. So you have the necessary knowledge available. There is going to be somebody working on the patch, and they're going to release the patch to work on it. So to very basically to remember, as long as it is not public with a proof of concept how to exploit it, and down the line there is going to be a patch coming in, it's going to be 0 days. Let's simplify it further, and I'll take a look at the analogy from a home perspective. And I believe that every one of us very well associate our home when we are looking to steal something, or we are planning to construct something from our home, and look at how a burglar would approach it, right? And we know what are the common known threats that the burglar come in, what are the common attack vectors, and top of that is they are going to get that through the windows or the main doors, the locks they will break in. And there are various tools, or the attack vectors they are going to use, which is the hammer, drilling machines, or there is going to be a wrench which is going to be used in snapping. Now we have this in mind, and then we construct our home, right? So we take care of, okay, if somebody comes in, we'll have the CCTV cameras installed, we'll have fencing done, we'll have adequate lighting in the compounding, and all the necessary safeguards at various points. Now, if from an outside and from inside as well, it looks safe, but this is where the game changes, right? Now you look at, there is a spot that is still open. This is exactly what happens when we look at designing a software. We think of all the known scenarios. We go about writing codes and developing applications in that context, but there is always that unknown, which definitely stays in the application, and that's what comes back and haunts us greatly. I hope that you get a good perspective in terms of how something that we have built today from all the known scenarios, but there is still a possibility or probability there is something we are leaving out. Now let's look at some of the popular zero-day attacks that has happened in the past, so that we get to associate how this has been increasing from a trend perspective. The popular ones are listed here, but the one I'm going to highlight, which has actually been in the news for quite some time, beginning with the Heartbleed, which was vulnerability in the OpenSSL cryptographic library. There was a Equifax bridge, which was again on the Apache Struts framework, which is very popularly used across many of the industries because it's available open source. The SolarWinds Orion attack, which happened in 2020, every 3 years there has been something or the other which really disrupts the industry. Um, and that is when the shift happened from the regular application or specific organization specific attacks. It was at a supply chain, and which in fact had a larger impact. And then again, the following year, the Log4 shell, which I think everybody would remember, multiple war rooms, every developer or security analyst, the CISOs, the CEOs, everybody were in the war room trying to find out whether they have this particular vulnerability. So the idea is to look at how the timeline has shifted. It was originally 3 years, now it was happening a particular within a year's frequency. And to add to that, the if you look at and go at deep on the national vulnerability database where the CVs are being released, this shows us that the CVs, the common vulnerability exposure, every year on year that is being published, there is a 30% increase in the new additions. So that means the attack vectors are increasing, which is increasing your attack surface. And obviously that includes, increases your threat landscape as well, because there are many avenues through which the threat actors now can evaluate and come into the environment. And that is evident. There are many research which is coming out. The one that you see on the left hand side, there is a huge surge in cyber incident, and any enterprises that we take up would have suffered one or the other major cyber incidents in last couple of years. Zero day attacks has been on the rise, and many of the enterprises do not have an answer how to deal with that. How do they get aware of things that are happening in the there are covert operations that are happening, how they get aware of those particular CVs which are probably not out yet in the market. And because we are talking about India, the focus is also has been the number of attacks or the number of incidents have skyrocketed in from a geographic perspective. India and the surrounding countries in the APAC has been the focus of the cyber attackers. And as I was mentioning, the supply chain attacks have also gone up, including the new emerging technologies that are coming in from a Gen AI and quantum computing. The threat actors have also looked at focusing on those areas, because that helps, that is giving them the area of penetrating into the convergence that is happening because of cloud, AI, IoT, OT. So one can enter into one particular application, and then they can navigate into the entire ecosystem of the enterprise. And OWASP is not far behind, looking at the various Gen AI threats that are happening. Deepfake is one of something which is popular. We are seeing a lot of initiatives that are being taken from OWASP as well, in terms of coming up with the guidelines which will help us quickly detect if there is a very specific threat which is coming out from a Gen AI perspective. Now, again, this is continuing, and this is where it becomes very serious. When we are looking at an enterprise, we are looking at a particular company or the associated companies with that enterprise. But now it's going into the OT side, which is where it becomes cyber physical. It is going to get associated with our lives, so human lives basically. And that's where we are seeing a huge increase in terms of the number of the percentage of attacks that are happening, and especially these two, the healthcare and critical infrastructure, which is where the maximum impact we can see. And that is evident, and that's where the doomsday scenario is what the title also encapsulate in terms of the apocalypse, is where the catastrophic events have started to occur. And we have seen that in India in last couple of years. many of you would have already guessed it in terms of the attack that happened on EMS, where the normal day-to-day operations of the OPDs and some of the other departments were completely halted. They had to go back into the paper mode. The digital systems was not working because of a ransomware attack, and they exploited a particular weakness in the system which they could take over. And that also continued into the power sector, where so basically what I'm trying to hint at is, earlier it was very focused and only financial driven, but now it is looking at a particular nation, trying to cripple the nation by attacking some of these critical infrastructure which directly deals or touches our lives in day-to-day operations. And that's where what we saw in the Lebanon pager explosion is where somebody could control the explosion point once the devices were distributed. And we saw the impact was devastating, and it was, there were many casualties. Now with software everywhere being distributed to every corner of the world, now imagine the same thing, the smartphone that we carry, somebody controlling it and decides one day that I'm going to take care of in a particular geo. Okay, it could be India, it could be anywhere else in the globe. So that's the kind of danger that we are looking at, and that's where it could be a doomsday. Somebody could control the entire healthcare connected system. Somebody getting operated could have an impact. It could be a complete sensor abnormality which could have a huge impact on the electric department as well. So it's going to impact our lives greatly. So it's really really something we need to now seriously look at. How do we um, you know address these kind of situations? So that's the whole idea in terms of emphasizing the importance that we are looking at the 0 day impacts that are having. Now, it was there earlier, but why this is happening at a frequent pace? These 0 day attacks are increasing from year on year. And that's where it lies into. This is where I'll draw your attention to a couple of reports that came in. One from Google, the Mandarin research team, they published one. And this is where I'd like to highlight the years, just mark the years 2019 to 2023, and especially the blue colored sections. It just started to pick up from there, and just look at the numbers thereon, right? So the attackers are shifting their focus to the third party components and libraries, which is again the supply chain. We saw that beginning with solar winds, then went into the Log4Shell with Log4j. I think 72 hours of workshops many of the enterprises would have experienced with Log4j, and that continued with new variants coming in. The target also is very focused. They are cyber espionage groups which are exploiting these 0 days, and that's being, they're upping the ante in terms of exploiting that. And there's a specific research where I've spent quite a some amount of time, where it looks like one of the nation state actor, which is from the Chinese origin, is where the more 0 days are coming in against other countries. And how that is happening, and that's the next thing that we need to do a deep dive on, is why there is an increasing in these trends. And that basically, when I deep dive into these two particular CTF rankings, and that came from one of the cyber defense report by Eugenio Benicasa. So in his report, he has highlighted that the exploitation, there has been multiple teams, and DEFCON and Pon2Own are very research oriented contest, these catch the flag contest, and they incentivize this. They give for finding new vulnerabilities the participant a good handsome money. And if you look at the trend, the blue ones or the green ones are how it is appearing on the screen, which is basically the Chinese group of hackers. And you look at the trend, they have started with very low in the system, but they ended up somewhere in the top three, coming in after the US. So which means the number of contributions, the number of findings have been increasing, and the vulnerabilities that they were finding out and reporting to all the vendors were of top notch quality. Now the next one, which is Pon2One, which we look at when 2014 it started, the period was very less for China, 13%, while rest of the world was 87%. And mind you, just all these findings were going to the vendors of Microsoft, Apple, Google, so that they can work on those fixes. and then these researchers will make it public. And this was happening. And just look at the growth from a China perspective as per the report that it highlights. And by 2017, the scenario had completely changed from 13% to it was almost dominating with 80%, right? So it had hit a pinnacle in terms of their maturity and their command over finding new, zero-day vulnerabilities. And also the participating teams from the China, Republic region was much increasing. In there are many teams that were coming in, and these people were also contributing greatly to the industry and to the community. They were reporting great numbers of zero-day issues to the various vendors, as I said. But what changed? If that was happening, everything was working well, and that's where something took place. And this is where we are now seeing that these zero-day vulnerabilities, instead of going to the vendors, are now becoming public or being exploited by nation state actors. So in 2020, the Chinese government created an ecosystem within their country, which is Hack for Hire. Okay, and that's where the Kihu 360, which is one of the leading cybersecurity providers who was contributing for social cause between 2014 to 2017, they were made to work for this particular ecosystem. So all these findings, which they were becoming proficient at, does not directly go to the vendors these days. They go to the nation states, which is within the Chinese organization, the ecosystem that they created, and from there, if they decide, they will release. Otherwise, they will keep it on hold until somebody else funds it. So that's the thing that is there now. Whether how they're using it, I leave it to your judgment and your feedback, how you think this is happening. But this is the relation that I could establish in terms of why there is a surge of zero-day attacks and why they are being so impactful, which was not happening earlier. Okay. Now, so that's in a view in terms of what was happening. Now, let's look at how these zero days are connected, and or we can connect it to application security, and can we handle it much better and be well prepared before it comes back against and haunts us. So that's where, when we dissected, or I dissected these vulnerabilities that were exploited by during the various breaches, take for that matter whether it is Heartbleed or Equifax or Log4Shell, it was, and these are the OWSP top 10 risks that has been marked against the particular breach. So common things that we see is the injection one. That means there is an input which came from the source, which was not handled properly by the application. This is exactly going back to the same scenario. We assume that nobody could come from the chimney route or from the roof route, and that's where somebody, the burglar, comes into the home, until we realize and something happens. Then we put a fence or an iron gate on top of it. So rather than waiting for it, can we just ensure that this happens? Because this is very easy, right, to do it immediately. Then the misconfigurations, when we're setting up the applications, some minute misconfigurations here and there, and we are letting the the vulnerable, the making the system vulnerable and let the threat actor come in. Same goes with the Log4Shell as well as the SolarWinds, where we did not watch out the system in which we are developing, and somebody came in and altered our source code. And the in case of Log4Shell, it was actually a vulnerable and outdated component, which also had the weakness where it did not handle the input that was coming in. So ultimately, all these exploits were on an application. It could be a product from a supplier, or it could be a business application. So it gives us the ability to, basically, ultimately, some programmer has written the code which was not coded securely, or when it was coded at a point in time, that point of time it was safe. But over the years, there has been weaknesses which have been discovered and listed and publicly available. But we did not go back and check that code again, or take that application again to find if it is still vulnerable, right? So major weaknesses in all these were input validation or misconfigurations issues. It should be very easy, right, to go ahead and fix it, but it's not the case. Why? And that's what is our next section, where we are going to do a deep dive in terms of defending. How do we defend against the zero day, and why we are facing challenges? Now the challenge is again multi-step. It's not a single straightforward challenge. there is possibly, we are all aware what needs to be done, or the developer is all aware what needs to be done, the security analyst knows what needs to be done, but there is also a possibility of human error. And this human error happens when there is no process in place. You have a great pen tester or great developer who is a security champion, but the process does not ensure there is review down the line, or the process does not check when there is multiple integrations happening from, data from or code from various sources are integrating. So in those cases, there is a high possibility human error is going to happen. Lack of knowledge, the developers keep coming, keep going, the teams change over years, and again new guys come in. If there is no systematic and methodological training in place, they are going to again struggle in terms of what they are bringing onto the table. So insecure practices are going to come in, and with a lot of Gen AI components coming in, and Gen AI is also being trained on many of these open source repository from GitHub, GitLab, whatever is publicly available, and those were never probably checked for security, right, in mind. So what code the Gen AI is going to generate most likely to be vulnerable. So even if you're just picking the code and using it, we might be falling a victim down the line because we have not tested that code. So lack of knowledge in terms of what to pick and whether we are picking the right thing is also equally important. Then many of the situation, what happens, the defenders like us who are on the other side of the table, we cannot gauge the actual risk exposure of the enterprise. So with this convergence happening, IoT, OT, cloud, AI, um, the right exposure, the right attack surface is very difficult to pinpoint. So while we are addressing some part of the system and application, there are still applications and systems which are sitting within the network which is not in our purview. So not knowing the accurate risk portion, this is exactly what many people struggled when the Log4j incident happened. They could not gauge the impact or the magnitude into which the library was used within the organization. So there was no centralized repository of to know how many applications are using it. There's no centralized way to know how many IPs were using the Log4j library. So it was very difficult. Outsource code, many of the enterprises love outsourcing. Once the code is developed, everything is okay, they just outsource it from a BA perspective. That's where the challenge comes in. You have to now, to make a change in the source code, the supplier charges you for that piece of code. So the CR takes time, or you do not have the budget, you have not planned for the budget. So managing it from an outsource perspective is also a challenge which comes in. And to add to it, the advisories that are coming from vendors are at times ambiguous, or exactly does not tell you what needs to be done. So you're dependent on other people to come and clarify what exactly needs to be in the done in those cases. The other two are anyway little sophisticated. You have absolutely no idea who has come in, mostly going into the monitoring and operations side. But the first six areas are pretty easy to be done, and that's where I think if teams focus, and we completely scout the knowledge that is available within the OASP repository, I think we could nail all these issues. And one of the example of lack of knowledge from a developer perspective. Now here the developer has actually done some validation on the user input to bypass or replace the script tag, but little did he know or she know that on error could also execute the particular alert. So just a simplest form, but when the threat actors or advanced actors come in, they will have it decoded and go to the next level where the the libraries that we think are safe are now not going to validate it to that extent. Hence, rather than going into these, refer to the checklist or advisories that are there in the OASP repository. So these are the main challenges that are coming in. So, what could be the mitigation strategies that we can look at, right, in terms of handling all these scenarios? So, the best place to go is the OAS Wayfinder, and that's where the link is given here. And most of you might already be aware of it, but I'll just relate to the problem statement, the challenges that I showed in the previous slide, and link it here so that it becomes much easier to know exactly what to do where. So the vendor advisories, okay, when they come in, if we think that there is something which is of obvious, And if we are looking at, handle it at the operation layer, that means the application is already running or exposed to the internet, bring in the necessary web application firewall or other controls to make the changes, so that at least we get the window to fix it later. Okay, so that's where one way we could address it, or rely on the third party WAF vendor who could take it up if you are not understanding the advisory that is coming in from the vendor. Human error, two fantastic repositories. One is culture building and process maturing. So this is where the process aspect that I talked about, even if we have fantastic developers, security champions in their teams, or a pen tester who is excellent in detecting vulnerabilities, but if they're not following the process, then you cannot do it from your mind. So there has to be a process where there is series of validations and reviews that are happening, and this is where these two repositories are going to eliminate those errors that come in. Lack of knowledge, again, a gold mine which teaches us about all the best practices or secure practices that we need to follow for developers, for testers, which we can adapt in the entire SDLC, not just for web applications but API driven applications as well, mobile applications, cloud native applications that we are developing, and also the top 10 across all these categories, including the new one which has been released for the LLMs. So getting a good perspective of what are the risks, and that once we know the enemies, I think then, and the risks that are there, then it becomes much easier to then go back and when we are writing, just keep those risk in mind, and it becomes much easier. The outsource code, when we are outsourcing a code and then trying to use it, ensuring that there is necessary implementation checks that are happening. Again, supply chain attacks are increasing, so what the vendor is using in our application or how they are maintaining, periodic checks here, and the periodic checks in the verification stage itself, right? Which will give a good visibility in terms of how does the supplier is ensuring that my ecosystem is up to date and there is no known vulnerability which is coming out from the supply chain, is out there open, at least the critical ones which might get exploited by the zero-day threat actors. Gauss the exposure. This is where the visibility of the entire ecosystem is not there, and the best place to start is vulnerability management. Consolidate all the vulnerabilities coming in from different sources into the central repository, and best place is Defect Dojo. And MAS gives you a very good picture in terms of what could be your attack surface. So if we just follow these basic things, we saw that the zero-day attacks, ultimately the attack to happen, you need to have a develop an exploit, and that exploit is developed on a zero-day vulnerability. So, and that vulnerability is nothing but some human error or some lack of knowledge that the developer has not done it, or the team that is hardening the application has not done it. So if you do this, we are definitely going to be ahead and fixing those, and it's going to be very difficult for the threat actor to come in. I hope that gives you, and it helps you relate how these things are working out. Now if you go back the four example that we saw, then how these four, if we take a look at, then it's going to would have, if these four would have been there, the Log4Shell, the SolarWinds attack, and the Equifax breach wouldn't have happened. So injection, just simple basic input validation and output encoding. Security misconfiguration, right? If you look at and take the best practices from the security misconfiguration, some of the other zero-day attacks wouldn't have happened. Vulnerable and outdated components, Log4Shell wouldn't have happened. We would have known it beforehand and taken care of it. The data integrity part, right? The thing that happened with SolarWinds, somebody came in and altered the DLL with malicious code, which got downloaded into 1800 odd customers' environment. That wouldn't have happened if you would have followed these particular, risk advisory from OWASP. So, just these four techniques or risk items and their associated advisories, if we start following, I think we are going to thwart a lot of, or at least block them, or make it very hard for the zero-day threat actors, or those who are exploiting the zero-day vulnerabilities, and it's going to go a long way in enhancing the cyber posture of the enterprise. And it can be extended to the very specific LLM top 10s, which is coming out on the Gen AI side and the cloud native application security side. If you're developing something on the cloud, just following these, would help us to reduce them as well. Now, with that, I think this would have given you good perspective in terms of why 0 day is becoming so important these days, and they are going to change our lives. It's going to affect us physically, and there are very specific, specialized actors, nation state actors now behind it, and any moment they could use it against particular nation or against particular, multiple nations at the same time. And there are very easy ways to handle it. If we understand the importance, there are very easy means to handle it. We just have to follow the best practices laid out from WASP. So, closing message, when we look at not just the article that I'm citing here, but any report that you take up, web application would still rank the top. 80 to 90% of the percentage would go to web application, any report you pick up, and rest all remains to the remaining areas. So if that is the case, why are we not looking at, so the key takeaways from here is going to be prioritizing application security, because this is what is going to help us to fix at the early stage, monitor it once our code is at the production layer, and we are going to be always on top. 0 day vulnerabilities are not going to pose a threat because I'm prioritizing application security, because ultimately it's code, right? What got exploited, as we saw in all the 4 0 days that we were picked in the initial slides, they all ultimately were codes. Then the multifaceted approach, it's not one thing that you do, it happens. You have to look at the education, right? You have to look at continuous learning of your team. It has to be a collaborative effort. It has to be not just the developer, the tester, the architects, everybody has to participate in that whole ecosystem, the monitoring team from a security operation center, and staying informed about the threat landscape. So the reports that I presented, they are showing us that there is something which is likely to happen in the coming days. And before we end up in a doomsday situation, let's warn ourselves and let's inculcate that practice of following the best practices and follow it in everything that we do, right? So that would help us to thwart these 0 day attacks coming in from these adversaries and nation state actors, and that is what is going to keep us ahead. With that, let's connect. If you want to know more, if you want to get some more insights, here are my coordinates. Almost 20 years of IT experience. Out of that, 15 years in cybersecurity. I lead 2 tracks: attack surface management, which is my primary domain area, but I also take up the additional responsibility of digital forensics and incident response. And here are my LinkedIn coordinates where you can reach out to me and we can exchange ideas. And if you have any topics to share, we can debate about the same. Now, last but not the least, the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. So are we understanding the importance the 0 day are going to have in the coming days? And looking at the doomsday scenario that we saw in the Lebanon attack, that's a reality not far away, right? So are we looking to change? Are we looking to adopt those security measures that we talked about and inculcate at very early stage of anything that we are developing, whether an application in the web or the APIs for the Gen AI piece, or the applications for the cloud native applications. So with that, I think I will wrap this session, and I'll be hoping forward for a feedback or any questions that you have. Thank you so much.
So, man, that was really really good, and you gave an overview about OWASP and the Wayfinder. I totally loved it. Like, it was totally amazing. I'm really glad that actually you covered it, because in the all the sessions that we have had so far, we have not
Mhm.
covered that part. So it was
Okay,
totally amazing.
fantastic. I was actually researching on the 0 day. In fact, one of our customers were asking about why we can't, thwart the 0 day attacks, and why we had to know late, and why there is a sudden rise. So that's where I was looking at, and some of these papers that I read. In fact, I'll also recommend you. I'll pass on these papers to you at your convenience. You can go through. Very insightful, actually. And when I drilled down, I thought it might be very difficult, but then when I drill down, it's actually code that gets exploited in the end. And OASP is kind of everything inside it You just do it from the basic. Is forget about these threat actors. They cannot do anything.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Somen. There are people who have a lot of questions about it, so you can actually answer them in the chat box. And thank you again for joining us. And everyone, stay tuned for the upcoming sessions. And hope you like this session. Please feel free to share your inputs, feedback, and connect with us. Thank you.